Hi class. Okay, now we're looking at chapter 11, Physical and Cognitive Development in Adolescence. So this is, their age range is like from 10 to 20 years of age. And I usually will start this lecture out with asking one of my students, what was your adolescence like? The reason why I do that is G. Stanley Hall would describe this as a time of storm and stress, a turbulent time. And what we find is that, in fact, only about a third of adolescents have had a adolescent time period that was a time of storm and stress. Most experience some ups and downs in their emotions, but nothing too severe, as G. Stanley Hall would say. Let me look at my notes here, guys. Start. Physical changes. Puberty, of course, usually occurs during adolescence. When we look at puberty, it is, again, it's much longer than we would typically think of it. Puberty is defined as a period of rapid physical maturation involving hormonal and bodily changes that occur primarily during early adolescence. It doesn't expand throughout adolescence. It's just one segment in adolescence, but adolescence continues after that. Typically, we'll see for females the first menstrual cycle, the menarche, will begin. For them, that's one of the hallmarks of puberty for them. One thing that we do see when we look at changes in adolescence is our hormonal changes. And what's interesting about hormones is they are directly injected into the bloodstream. And so that's why your teenage daughter or teenage son will have these emotional swings that occur like on a dime. I know for each of my kids, I thought, let's try that boarding school. It's now a good time for this. But the reason why it happens so rapidly is because it's injected directly into the bloodstream. I had a client years ago came in and she was addicted to heroin. She came in and she was like rubbing her body the whole time. And I asked her, I said, are you okay? And she said, yeah, I just need to use the restroom. Well, she went to the restroom, shot up, came back and passed out in my chair. So that's like a hormone. That's so fast with them. Let's see. So very powerful chemicals, substances. Of course, we've got different types. We've got testosterone and estradiol. Testosterone and estradiol are both in males and females, but different quantities for, to kind of explain that. I did want to mention, remember I talked about menarche, timing and variation. And what's interesting about it is that we have a thing called precocious puberty. You see it in males, but more often in females. And that is a client who may be 8 or 9 years old has already started their menstrual cycle. And so the question is, what causes that? When we look at the timing of the first menstrual cycle for women, what it is related to is body weight and body fat. So 106 pounds plus or minus 3 pounds. And the key thing is 17% of the girl's body weight is made up of fat. Now that seems like a lot, but it's really not. And so what we do see though is we see, because of our diet, we're seeing obesity occurring at a younger age, when we talked about that a few chapters ago. And as a result of that, we see precocious puberty. And so typically what they'll do is they will suppress it with gonadotropic secretions that stop that puberty process. Corpus callosum improves. That's this bandwidth that connects the right and the left hemisphere. By the way, just as a side note, it's thicker for females than males. It's one reason why they can process information a little bit faster than males in debates and those type of things. But we see this begins to thicken, processing information. We also see development of the amygdala. That's our seat of our emotions. That's maybe we can attribute to hormones. We can attribute to the amygdala as far as why there's more emotional activity occurring. And also we see the improvements in development of the prefrontal cortex. That's this part up here. That's the key thing is the ability to delay gratification, resist impulsivity, and increase attention. Those are some key components there. Text talks about adolescent sexuality. Who should teach it? That's usually the question I ask in the classroom. And, I'll have students say, well, most students are going to say that the parents should teach it or the schools should teach it. But we still have the highest rate of teen pregnancy, although it's declining. It's declining, but we still have the highest rate of teen pregnancy in the industrialized world. So we're not really doing a very good job of it. One of the things that does help, typically, or from the research, statistically speaking, is to have an outside agency come into the school and present the different methods of abstinence that are out there and teaching sex education. Adolescent health, critical juncture. What we know is that teenagers that develop good habits now, eating right, exercising right, are more likely to carry that on throughout their life. Leading cause of death, accidents, homicide, especially with African American males, is the second leading cause of death, and suicide. And we're going to see kind of why that is, accidents being motor vehicle accidents. We're going to see why that is in a few minutes when we look at the cognitive development. Substance abuse, one big, huge concern is alcohol. Certainly the opiates are a big concern, but alcohol is a concern as well. And the reason why is there's a thing called binge drinking. And we see it more often in colleges. Almost every year you'll see some kid that has been involved in binge drinking, consuming large amounts of alcohol at one time, and then they die. And the reason why they die is because there's not enough time for their body to reject it. As opposed to an alcoholic, they'll be drinking all day long, and then they'll pass out, or they'll throw up. But if you're consuming large quantities at one time, your body doesn't have time to reject it. And so that's why it's one concern. Smoking is another concern. Unfortunately, we're seeing a decline in that. If I started smoking today, at my age, compared to someone who was 14 and started smoking, they smoked for a year and I smoked for 10 years, they're more likely to be prone to lung cancer than I am. And that's because their lungs are still developing it. So we see that the effects of nicotine on their lungs. Of course, painkillers, those are a huge concern for sure. Next thing they talk about is eating disorders. Two major ones, anorexia nervosa, which is a very dangerous type of eating disorder. Very, very dangerous. And that's where there's this starvation that goes on. And there's changes in the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is a part of the brain that deals with sexual activity, eating, arousal, those type of things. And so we actually see changes in the hypothalamus of children or adolescents that engage in this anorexia nervosa, pursuit of fitness through starvation. And they actually see themselves. They used to do this research with a kaleidoscope. That's, where you have like pictures, you move it around, you look inside there, you see different colors. Well, in this kaleidoscope, they would shift it around to see the image of a woman on there. And they would tell that these women with anorexia, these teenage women with anorexia nervosa, that the shapes were not accurate. And almost without exception, they would portray the woman as larger than she was, even though, disproportionately larger than she should be. Then there's bulimia nervosa, and this is a much more common type of eating disorder we see in teenagers. And essentially, that's where they'll eat a lot of food, then they will make themselves throw up, and then they feel guilty about the whole process, and then they eat another food. And, it's just a repetition that's going on over and over again. Adolescent cognition, I do want to emphasize this. Piaget's approach, there's different approaches, but just for brevity's sake, I want to emphasize Piaget's approach. He has a formal operational stage. That's during the stage where they can think about things hypothetically. There's two limitations. There's adolescent egocentrism, and that's presented in the form of imaginary audience. That's why your teenager has to have the right shoes because they believe everybody's watching them. And then there's a personal fable, and that's the belief that no matter what, I'm going to live. That's why the military, they look for 18-year-olds as opposed to me. I know I'm going to die before I get off the plane. 18-year-olds think, no, the bullet's going to go through me, and then I'm going to go kill the bad guy. There's also a time of information processing, decision making. They're just more competent decision makers, although it doesn't always present itself. And that's why we'll see somebody make an A in driver's ed but still get tickets. Critical thinking, changes in cognitive functioning. They're able to think more hypothetically again. And transitioning. Middle school during this stage is an important thing. It didn't come about till the 1920s, 1930s. That's because of the unique things that are going on with their bodies and their minds that this specific school addressed to them was found to be important to help them make this transition into adulthood. And then service learning is the last thing they talk about, a component that's no longer required in many schools today. So with that said, guys, that finishes up chapter 11. Thank you very much for your patience.